Hello, keyboard touchers. What's up? We're here for episode 4, Keyboard A to Z. Again, this is a series for people that are relatively new into the hobby, that are just picking up their first keyboard or thinking about picking up their first high-end keyboard. Uh, as always, this will also have some tips and tricks that may be valuable to people that are more experienced in the hobby. So in the last video, we talked about all the things to do before you get your keyboard. Now, let's talk about all the things you have to do once you get your keyboard. So, let's get into it. Congratulations, you are the owner of a new keyboard, which is in a box. So, step 1 is always check the box. Okay? The box comes in. You obviously want to get right into it, but you want to check the outer box for damage. Not just the outer box of the keyboard, but the outer shipping box. You want to be able to see if there has been any sufficient damage caused by the logistics company, essentially. This is one of the first things you should do. I will show you an example of when things go wrong. So this is the i69 by Illuminati Keyboards, and it may be hard to see, but there is a large cut. Let me see if I can get in there. This was basically knifed by customs. There is a knife mark right here. So while trying to open the box, they knifed my keyboard. In a situation like this, the group buy runner is not going to help you. In a situation like this, you need to liaise directly with the logistics company. In this case, I sent them a bill for the entire value of the keyboard and a letter explaining the fact that you knifed this means that this has lost every single dollar of its value. It's the equivalent of you knifing a Gucci sweater. It cannot be used anymore. And after a lot of back and forth, they paid in full for this keyboard. So don't be scared to get in there and get active. This only works if your keyboard is actually valued at the price of the keyboard. If this was valued at like $20, then I'd be shit out of luck. All right. So let's say the box is fine, or let's say the box is roughed up. Okay. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the board. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the PCB. Now, I don't have a PCB in close reach, but what I would be doing is taking the bag for the PCB and checking inside, making sure there's no diodes left in there. If a diode has fallen off, it's not the end of the world. You need like 1 minute of patience to essentially solder it back on. And if I can do it, you can do it. But yeah, check for missing diodes if a PCB has really been knocked around, okay? You don't have to reach out to the group buy runner and be like, I need a new PCB. If the diode's right there, you just put it on, solder it back, and you're good to go. And finally, when you're checking out the box, make sure everything is accounted for. Make sure you're not missing anything. All right. So after checking the box, the next step is to quality control. Now, this is a long and complicated subject, and generally the maker themselves will do the quality control, but you need to do some quality control when you get it on your end. There is what some people will consider a acceptable flaw. There is something that almost nobody will consider an acceptable flaw. So we'll start with the most terrible flaws and work our ways towards the least noticeable flaws. All right? So from what I would consider lowest quality product, what you're looking for is machining failure, okay? Machining failure is pretty much unacceptable, at least on the outside of the keyboard. This is a Pizza 80, also known as the Fox Orange 80. Right here, right there are machining marks from a tool slip. You see that? Looks like tiny little ridges right there. That was from the CNC machine slipping. So either this slipped or the tool slipped or the guy holding it slipped. Important thing is a outside machining failure like this is generally considered unacceptable. This is technically like on the inside, so I didn't really care. Plus it was a cheap board. Another example of this would be a big ding, or a big scratch, or a big dent, or a chip in, for example, a piece of stainless steel, or a piece of brass, or a piece of aluminum, God forbid. So anything in which the model of the product, the 3D model, does not match up to what you have gotten, that is the highest level of just send it back. Send it back. Send it back, get a refund. You should not be accepting a product that is mathematically different, because a CNC machine only speaks math. So it should not be mathematically different from the product that you were promised. All right, next step is you want to check for finishing, right? So one of the first things I'll look for that I would consider unacceptable would be anosplashing, right? So this is my crin, and it's really hard to tell here. There's a tiny little splash right there where the color of the ano does not match the rest of the board. Right there. There's a slightly darker area. Kind of hard to see. Kind of hard to see. Kind of just looks like a shadow or something. But that is an anosplash. It's literally a splash of liquid that should not have been there during the anodization process. So if this is on the outside of your keyboard, okay, then I would consider the product not A stock. Like, I would consider this B stock. The vendor considers this A minus stock. So there is always a discrepancy of what you think is fair versus their quality control standards. But for me, a outside ano splash is unexcusable for an A stock unit, right? Now, the next thing you're trying to look for with anodization is something called banding or streaking. This is generally okay. I wouldn't send it back for having streaking or banding, but I'll show you an example of that. Now, I don't have a board with streaking, but here's a good example. It's an okay example. So here we can see banding on the black area, where you see darker bits, lighter bits, and basically streaks, right? Generally, for banding, what you're looking for is, if this is supposed to be a solid color, this part right here, you see that, again, use your imagination, but if you see that the center of it right here is a darker color or a lighter color than the top and bottom, that is banding. That is generally acceptable by most makers, but it's something to keep an eye out for. For example, the original F1 I was going to buy was going to be in gray. And I heard that the gray units had a problem with banding. So I picked up a black unit instead, and it turned out totally fine. So that's something you have to keep in mind as well. Obviously, we go back in time and do it before you order the keyboard. The next thing to look for is major deformities in PVD, electroplating, anything like that. Generally, what you're looking for, I don't have an example of this, is pitting. So it'll just look like little holes in your PVD. Again, acceptable, but again, something to keep in mind. And then anything after this point basically is entirely up to the maker. Some makers will consider different tiers of stocks, like A stock, B stock, C stock, completely differently than others. So you have ano striping or grain. That generally means that you can see the underlying grain of the extruded aluminum. That's usually a aluminum issue and not a finishing issue. Again, you can't really do much about it, but it's good to know about. You want to take a look at electroplate and PVD little bubbles. So the opposite of a pit, where it looks like it has tiny little pimples on it. Again, acceptable, but something to keep an eye out on. This, you'll very likely not be able to send a keyboard back for this, but anodization color matching. Your top should match your bottom, right? Or your sides should match your top. It depends what kind of board it is, but if there's a seam, the colors should match. Now, there is color matching and there is reflectivity matching. And this is when we get into the big boy stuff. So if I'm getting a TGR Jane, for example, I'm going to check for reflectivity matching. Or let's take a look at this Illuminati ISO. This looks, so top piece, bottom piece. You can see that in some lights, the color does match, and in some other lights, the colors do not match. Okay, this is a B-stock, by the way. This is a reflectivity mismatch, where the underlying color is the same, but depending on how the light hits it, it can look like the colors match, like they do now, or it can look like they don't match, like they do now. So this is at the absolute highest tier, is looking at reflectivity mismatch. Now, generally, all these smaller nitpicky things are not things you're going to be able to take your board and send it back. But they're things that you'll consider when you're looking at your board. And let's say, for example, I get a board that has some striping and the maker doesn't want to help me out. I'll sell it to somebody that's okay with it. I don't want to have striping on my particular unit, for example. Or, if I'm buying a high-end board, I want perfect reflectivity mismatch, which for the record is very hard to do. But I want perfect reflectivity mismatch as well as, perfect reflectivity match as well as color match. Right? Anyway, this, like I said, is very nitpicky. The important thing is to make sure that there's no random holes, no random dings, no machining marks on the outside, and no egregiously bad finishing problems. If your keyboard passes all of these, then you're generally good. And if you want to know more about, the processes of quality control, hop into the Discord, or consider watching my streams on Twitch, where when I pick up a board, I instinctually will start QCing it, because that's what I do. I pick this up, it's a very nice purple. A lot of people will be like, oh, it's a nice purple keyboard. But I start looking, where's the anode grain? Is there striping? Is there splashing? Where are the hook marks? Stuff like that. And that's just how I think personally. And it is of different importance to different people. So let's keep it reasonable, okay? So you've checked out your keyboard. What do you do next, okay? Test your PCB. Test your PCB, okay? I don't do this, but doing it would have saved me like 10 hours thus far in this hobby, okay? Even taking into account the time it would take to actually test the PCBs. So, tweezers, plug it in, test it, test it. I know it's a pain in the ass, but it takes like 2.5 minutes. Test your PCB. Make sure it works. The amount of times that I've done a full build and then the PCB just doesn't work has only been like twice or 3 times, but that cost me many, many hours. So while you've got it plugged in and you're testing your PCB, let's say everything is good, set up your key map. Consider via L as your firmware if it is available. It's always easier to flash a PCB while it's sitting on your desk instead of sitting in a case. I prefer via L for its ability to do tap dance and longer macros and other QMK stuff that via isn't as good at. So check your PCB, check your case. What now? Well, now build time. Let's build it. Let's go. So I hope you've broken your switches and lubed them, like I said in the last video. If not, take your time. Take your time. You don't have to build it right now, okay? I know it's right here, and I know you want to build it, but you don't have to build it right now. It can sit. It can sit. It can sit until your switches are ready, until they're all lubed, all modded, all broken in, and then do your build. Make it so it's a build that you actually deserve. If you've put this much effort in, just go all the way, okay? And take your time. Take your time. A rushed build will end up being trash most of the time. You'll have crooked switches. You'll have switches that feel different than other switches. They'll sound different than other switches. In the end, you end up building it twice or 3 times and wasting so much time. So take it easy. Follow a build guide if one is given, okay? Because some boards are complicated to put together. That K right there, where if you don't know what you're doing, it's probably not going to fit together properly. So yeah, check your build guide. All right. So let's talk about just small little tips that I have for assembly. 1, check your stabs before assembling. Okay. Put your stabilizers on your PCB, put a switch in there, grab a keycap. Okay. You should just have bags of keycaps on your desk like me, totally normal. Okay. Grab a keycap, put it on the stabilizer, make sure it's okay. Especially if you're using clear stabs like Durox stabs, Owlab stabs, KB defense, basically anything that's not just a cherry stabilizer, check it. Check it. Because the amount of times that I have gotten a stabilizer like that, done a full build, and then I go to press the key and figure out it ticks no matter what I do, or it sounds weird, or it doesn't move the way that it should. Save yourself the hassle before you even put the plate on. Test your stabs. Okay? Consider cherry picking your switches as well. Okay? If you're going to go all in on a build, cherry pick your switches. But Simon, how do I cherry pick my switches? Well, I get this question a lot, but here's a bunch of switches. Okay? What I'll do is I'll grab a switch and I'll see how it feels and sounds. I'll be like, oh, okay, this is pretty good. All right, now I'll grab the next one. How does this one compare? Is this one better? This one is actually worse. Okay, so on my desk, I'm going to put it below this one. Let me check the third one. Okay, I think this one is better than the original one, so I'm going to compare to the original one. This is the original, this is the third switch. Okay, I am correct. This one feels better. So you follow the same technique where you essentially build 3 different categories. At all points, I will keep my best switch on this side, so I can compare to my best switch at all times. So always, I have my best switch here, I grab another switch out of the bag, I test it. How does it compare? If it's close to your best switch, then perfect, you have cherry picked. And keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going until you finish all your switches, essentially. Now this one is my best switch. So this goes in the best switch hand, and this is still pretty close. So this is me cherry picking, essentially. You should be able to do this natively without having to think about it with enough time. As long as you always have a point of comparison, right? It's like tasting wines or whiskeys, you know? Whiskey tastes like burning, but when you're comparing one whiskey to another whiskey, you can be like, this one, has a more cinnamony taste, and this one has a fruity back flavor. You start noticing things because you're comparing things that are very close together. Same thing for cherry picking switches. Again, if you need more help, hop in the Discord, get on my stream, ask questions. We are very helpful. Maybe I'll someday do a guide on how to cherry pick properly. This is just like a very, very basic idea of how to cherry pick your switches. The TLDR is if it feels really bad, throw it to the side, don't use it. Okay? If we want to go super in depth, then if it feels really bad, you put it to the side, you revisit it, and then you essentially mix and match parts until you can create as many good switches out of your bad switch pile. But that's more advanced. For now, cherry pick. If it feels bad, throw it to the side. Obviously, we don't all have the luxury of having twice the amount of switches that we actually need for the build, but it's something good to have, especially if you're going to be using something cheap, like Gaterons, Milky Top Gaterons, J-Wicks, Hyperglides, something like that, where you're going to spend like 25-ish cents max. Get some extra switches. All right. Another pro tip: put your hot swap PCB on the table when inserting switches. That is very, very good advice. So if you got a hot swap PCB, put it on a flat surface when you go in and you insert your switches. Hot swap PCBs are very easy to break because if you put pressure on the wrong part of the hot swap socket, then it just breaks off the PCB. And fixing a hot swap socket is a lot harder than fixing, a messed up pad on a solder PCB. So play it safe, flat surface, slowly, methodically, so you don't bust your hot swap PCB. And the last tip is one that I still do to this day, which is put caps on your bottom row before you solder, okay? Put caps on your bottom row before you solder. Now, you'll be like, oh, I know what a keyboard bottom row looks like. It's always the same. Is it? Is it? Because, this is a Sangan bottom row. This goes 1.51, 1.57, 1.51, 1.5. All right? What about this? What is this? This is what? 1.25, 1.25, 6.25? It's not always the same. So what is the play? The play is you put the switches in place without soldering them. And then you get your keycaps and you put them on the bottom row. You make sure that your bottom row actually fits. And then just flip it over and solder it with the keycaps on. That way you cannot screw it up. I still do this all the time, and I'm a professional. So there's nothing wrong with doing it. If you're ever unsure or the PCB is not clearly marked, put the switches in, put the caps on the switches, then solder it. All right. All right. You have built your keyboard. Congratulations. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. The next step, obviously, is being comfortable with your keyboard, right? You're not always going to nail your first build perfectly. The switches or the keycaps may not line up with what you had in mind, okay? So evaluate it. Evaluate your build, and then see what kind of further changes you want to make. You can rebuild it. You can, for example, this Sandglass Ergo, which is a beautiful, big Ergo TKL. We built that a few weeks ago, and I noticed some of the stabs are not great. So tomorrow, for example, on stream, I'm going to open it up, clean up the stabs, clean up the mounting points, all sorts of stuff like that. This here, this Auger prototype that I'll be doing a review on soon, this was built with Owlab stabs, and they were so bad that we had to rebuild the entire keyboard. If I had tested the stabs, wouldn't be a problem. But also, we realized that the original switches in it were not the best fit, so we swapped to some Gateron X round 2, which turned out fantastic. So yeah, just because it's built doesn't mean it's over, okay? If you don't like it, you don't have to go buy another keyboard. Tune it. Prove to yourself that you have the capability of getting a keyboard to sound and feel the way you want it to sound and feel. It takes time, it takes effort. You'll probably have to go out and buy like extra key sets and extra switches, but it's fine. It's fine. Take your time, make your keyboards nice, okay? If you've got 10 builds or 5 builds or even 2 builds, okay? If your builds are not good, if you don't like your own builds, then what are you actually doing in this hobby, right? Like, nobody's gonna make a build that they hate, unless it's for memes. But like, I love how I pointed to the K. It was instinctual. Anyway, point is, take your time, refine it. Take your time, refine it. Be able to actually sit and type on it and be like, okay, here are the things I don't like. How do I fix them? And then if you don't know how to fix them, get some help. Again, hop in the Discord, ask some friends. Watch some informative videos, You can do it. You can absolutely do it. Anyway, so that's basically it. That's the process of everything that happens once you get your board all the way through to actually typing on it. And the last video will be next week, hopefully. This video was late because I was quite sick. I'm better now. But the last video will be about staying content in this hobby, staying happy in this hobby without having to buy 40 keyboards. Yeah. And I love that, it's me that is going to tell you all about that. But yeah, I will get input from the people that helped me with this video, all my patrons that actually really help, putting together the outlines and stuff like that for this video. And we will be able to convince you how to be happy in this hobby without needing to buy 57 keyboards. All right. Goodbye, friends. I'll see you next episode.